which is our city's traditional LGBTQ zone, and the National LGBT Chamber, appointed at Mayor Sylvester Turner to serve on the City of Houston's first LGBTQ plus advisory board, and has served on the Victory Fund Board of Directors. She has been recognized by the prestigious BQ magazine as a legendary leader in the LGBTQ plus community. Welcome, Tammy. And finally, Enrique Torremolina, who is an activist and consultant for LGBTQ plus inclusion, co-founder of Colmena 41, columnist and radio host, frequent collaborator of media and organizations in the public, private, and social sectors, specialist in sexual diversity issues, as well as assembly person of the Council to Prevent and Eliminate Discrimination of Mexico City, manager of global communications and global campaigns at All Out, advisor at Quist, and mentor at Enseña por México. He holds a degree in international relations from the Universidad de las Américas, Puebla. Welcome, fellow panelists. It is now my great pleasure to start our discussion. And I will pose the first question that I have prepared for the panelists, and then we'll have Anis, Alberto, Tammy, and then Enrique. The question is, as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, what were the main obstacles you had to fight when you started your professional careers? Also, what hurdles you have to face during your work as LGBTQ advocate or as LGBTQ person out of work? Please, Anis.
Sorry, my dog started barking just as you asked that question. Hopefully it'll be quieter for a moment. I started my activist career in the early 70s. I'm 64. I'm 65 years old. So no secrets in politics to orient everyone. And the obstacles that I faced as an activist in the 70s are different than the ones that I faced as an activist today. The obstacles I faced in business, because I also had a business career, are different than the ones I face today. I would say the most singular change has been that when I attended my first activist major organizing event, it's in 1975, Texas Gay Conference. It was the isolation. There was no internet, there was no social media. There wasn't a 24-hour news cycle. As activists, we were on our own little islands, wherever we were, and there was very little opportunity to learn from each other, to share information, to be able to use best practices and support each other. As a leader of an LGBT organization today, I have the opportunity to instantly engage with people around the world. And we have built a broad community. We're no longer on our own islands, feeling isolated. And yet, Victory does work in multiple countries. We have a broad footprint across Latin America. We work in some other countries as well. And in a lot of those places, that sense of isolation, that sense of being separate, and there is no broad community is very prevalent. Places where there are repressive governments, places where there's very little access to the wireless to be able to communicate. And so in a sense, I feel like I've come full circle, and some of the challenges I dealt with, I have to, I dealt with in the early days, I have to deal with again today. I had a 20-year career in business in the oil and gas industry between my activist time in college and between and what I do now. And the biggest challenge in business was my own mindset and the belief that I needed to be in the closet at work, even though I was an activist in the community. I believed that I could split my life, that I could go to work and be completely separate from all of the activities that I did as, on my own time on the weekends. And I finally realized that it was too stressful to do that, that I had to bring my whole self together, and I could give a better job to my employer, and I could give it better and do better for myself if I integrated the two. And then I would say the biggest obstacle in politics, when I entered politics, and I had a 18-year career in politics, is that because I had been an activist before I entered politics, I was, for many people, only an LGBTQ activist. And it took me a long time, and in fact, 2 losing races. I won 9 races in Houston, but I lost 2, to convince people that I was more than an LGBT activist, that I had ideas and energy. So to sum up, for many of us, we have to make a choice of how we present ourselves to the world. And I would submit that it is important to both ourselves, but also to our community and to the work that we do, to try to integrate the activist, the person who is LGBTQ, and the work we want to do. And I'll pass the mic.
Thank you, Anis. And now, Alberto, if you can please give us your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo and Anis. Hello, everyone. I would say that my biggest difficulty was growing up in an all-boys school in the 60s and 70s. I didn't know any gay person, an openly gay person, until finishing college, believe it or not. So those were the real difficult years. But once out in Mexico City, which is middle, upper classes have been kind of liberal, and as a cultural promoter, I didn't really find many obstacles. I had women bosses that understood me, and because I was openly gay, I was respected in general. And then I entered the foreign ministry, where there was, and there has always been an important gay community, but I am probably one of the, or part of the first generation of openly LGBTQ. So the biggest hurdle for us was the lack of formal recognition for our partners when we were sent abroad. Getting a visa for my now husband was, we had to go around and see, because in that time it was impossible to ask our government to request a visa for our partners. And the same thing with health and insurance. But it was, I haven't been an activist. My only activism has been openly gay, being openly gay always, and not hiding. When in 2006, civil union was permitted in Mexico City it was passed by the local legislature. We, a group of Mexicans, tried to have it recognized, but we would have to had the law changed. And it was until 2009 when Mexico City accepted gay marriage, that immediately, once the Supreme Court in 2010 approved it and declared it constitutional, that really opened up the possibilities. And I'll talk more about that later. So the biggest hurdle for me, the most difficult, was having for me and my colleagues, having our partners being recognized.
Thank you, Alberto. And now we give the mic to Tammy.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And you know, some of what Anise was sharing certainly resonates with me. You know, I worked for roughly almost 15 years in the financial services industry. You mentioned that, Mellon Bank, Bank of America, Nations Bank, and it was a very corporate type of environment. But I lived in this constant fear that I would lose my job simply because I'm a lesbian. And that kind of stress, it just creates this unbelievable amount of anxiety on top of trying to perform at your job. I mean, all of this weight that's on your shoulders. And for me, I spent so many years in the closet, and what that meant in the workplace was that I didn't share the most important aspects of my life, activities such as what I did over the weekend, or some of my most important life moments. I mean, I was hiding every aspect of myself. And we called this term covering, and it was literally covering all those important parts of my life. But think about that, from my partner, our life together, our big milestones. I mean, when we bought a house, our vacations, all of these things that we'd normally share in the workplace, I just didn't feel comfortable sharing. I literally, my coworkers called me a private person because I built this wall around myself, to protect myself, because I feared that anything that I might say might help me. And then with me being out could come the very real risk that I would get fired. So every day, every interaction with my coworkers, I was literally vetting every word I spoke. And that is stressful when you're sitting there trying to interact with people and certainly trying to work. And then you're having to think about the words you're saying. So it was this veiled language, that I had to use. And just some real world examples about what that looked like. Think about those typical workplace questions. What are you doing this weekend? Or how was your weekend? Or where did you spend the holiday? And I will say that last, the holiday question, I haven't had no family in Houston. So that was, just added additional pressure. So here's what I did. Over the weekend, I would find myself crafting in my head these responses. What am I going to say Monday? Knowing these questions are going to come. And it was always, oh, well, let's see, I had dinner with a friend or friends, or I'm celebrating a friend's birthday. And my partner, she was so much more, but I could not convey that. So I just rarely shared, my personal life at work. And that looked like too, pictures on my desk, never bringing her to the company picnic, all of these parts, because I feared rejection in the workplace. And growing up, I understood rejection. I experienced rejection younger, in my younger years, and I just couldn't deal with the pain of feeling that every day in the workplace. And so, some of the hurdles that I experienced in the workplace were, language. Not only could I not come out, but when I did finally come out, there wasn't this language. What did they call my partner? Other hurdles, think about this, benefits. When my partner's father passed away, who was very much a father-in-law to me, I didn't even have bereavement benefits. When I filled out my emergency form at work, imagine this, a simple form of filling out a form, and I'm stressing over who I put as my emergency contact. These are the real experiences that LGBTQ people face in the workplace. It's incredibly stressful. And this whole, covering aspect, when you can't bring your full and authentic self to work, it just takes pieces and pieces.
Thank you, Tammy. And now, Enrique, please, can you please share with us your story?
Thank you, Guillermo, and hello to everyone. It's interesting listening to your challenges because I'm just realizing some of the, thanks to you going through those challenges and or people from maybe your generation, just because I'm aware I'm younger, I can now understand how, some of the things I talk about happened. I came out when I was 19, when I was just starting going to college. I went to the same university as Guillermo. I was studying international relations. And I immediately after coming out, I became involved with LGBT plus student life, which was very rich in our school, fortunately. I joined an LGBT student association. We had a student-run radio station, so I had an LGBT show with other friends. I started writing about LGBT issues for the school newspaper. I started researching the LGBT movement and LGBT legislation in different countries for my classes. And that started, just as an academic interest. But as I learned more and more, I became more interested in finding, professional possibilities in that space. So I tried first finding either work or internship or volunteering opportunities with LGBT organizations locally or anywhere in Mexico. There weren't many, and I ended up doing a couple of internships and temporary work with US-based organizations. So first I worked with a state agency called the New York State Division of Human Rights, which was a New York State government agency that dealt with discrimination claims. And then I worked with an international LGBT nonprofit, which at that time was called the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission. Now they changed their name to Outright Action International. And living in New York for a few months and having these experiences also kind of made me aware of the diversity of organizations and kinds of work and agendas within the LGBT movement. Media, mental health, homelessness, HIV, trans communities, immigration, workplace inclusion. And I was fascinated, and that was it. I was hooked for good. And so then I came back, I finished school, and I just, kept thinking, how can I make that a career? How can I make that my work? And so my main hurdles were twofold. Number one was actually finding paid work related to LGBT advocacy, which at first were paid projects and eventually paid full-time jobs. And in the meantime, I would, juggle those things with work in other, sometimes related, sometimes not related at all, organizations. And the second one, and I'll use a word that Anis, that you used, and it really resonated with me, which was isolation. The second hurdle had to do with finding support and understanding a little bit from friends, but mainly from my family. I had an okay coming out process with my family, mainly because I had other LGBT people in my family who had come out before me. And they were, mostly great with their response, but they were very concerned and kind of, they really struggled to understand why I wanted to work in LGBT, right? So they were like, okay, you're gay, we get it, that's fine. But why does everything else have to be about that also? And I think they were skeptic and afraid, understandably, that I would not be able to find work, or that this would not make sense, or that this would put me at risk or in danger. All of those things happened at different times, or had happened since then. This was 14 years ago. But you know, I think well, there was also the issue of them not seeing how this interest or this passion was connected with what I majored in, which was international relations. To me, it was, and it is 100% connected. But they would ask me, Enrique, why not become an ambassador? Why not work with the UN? Why not go into, you know, some other international organization that has nothing to do with human rights or LGBT rights? Funnily enough, some of those organizations I did end up working with at different points, but I think it took them some time to understand it, and of course that fear and that skepticism. You know, I took some of that, so that, you know, I would also be like, why am I doing this? Does this make sense? Why not just pursue a career in anything else and make my life a bit easier? But I would always feel the pull, you know, back into human rights and LGBT rights, and I don't regret it now.
Thank you, Enrique. And it is very important to hear these testimonies. We see a common thread here. You know, the being invisible, the isolation, the hiding, the splitting in two. But then it comes, you know, it gets better, because we have to fight, and we are continue fighting. We are thinking about people from different generations, and including myself, that I share some of the common threads here. And thinking about that, and thinking about your later careers or your different experiences, what strategies have you used in your work as out LGBTQ person or as an advocate that have been useful and successful to you? And also, what advice would you give to people in your field or different fields? We know that some of you have been in different fields. Would like to be advocates, but also or out at work, or allies? Because also the work of the allies of the community is very important for the mutual understanding. Anis, would you like to go first, please?
I'm happy to go first. I do think it's important to acknowledge that while we all have different experiences and we've experienced different things, we come from different perspectives. We don't have anyone on this panel today who represents the transgender community. And today, if you look at the changes in the movement, those are the members of our community who are most at risk, most targeted, and have the most hurdles in navigating the world. But to the direct answer to your question, the strategy that I have most used is to try to understand that I had a coming out process. While I was out I came out when I was 15. I was out when I was in college. I was an activist. As I said earlier, I thought I could separate I could be an activist and turn it on and off. That I could attend a gay organizing event. I could advocate as the leader of an LGBT organization and could put on a completely different persona and go to work. I would much rather have been on, and I did do this in the 70s and 80s, been on a TV panel and be interviewed because it wasn't personal, then I would have wanted to go into a fast food place and in a T-shirt that had a gay logo on it. That impersonal, that distance was helpful for me. So I had my own coming out process. I have found it helpful to understand that people who disagree with me, people who dislike me because of my sexual orientation, should be allowed a process as well. They should not be allowed to discriminate against me. but I try to put myself in the shoes of whoever's on the other side of the issue and not work from a place of anger. Because I have been involved in this movement for coming on 50 years soon, I would not have survived if I did it from anger. And I had the luxury, as many in our community don't, and as I said earlier, particularly our trans community, to choose when to confront issues. And so the combination of not being angry, not having a chip on my shoulder, not fighting because I am in pain, but fighting because I want to make change, fighting because it's the right thing to do, has helped sustain me all these years. One of the things that people who might be watching this, who are allies, can do is speak up, show up, not just during Pride Month, but then stand aside. Sometimes the best thing you can do as an ally is to take your platform, to take your microphone, to take your opportunity and hand it to someone else so they can speak for themselves, which is why I thought it was important to reference that the life experience of those in the transgender community needs to be elevated, particularly right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Anise. Thank you very much. And it's important to listen and to create allies and connections. Alberto, can you please share with us your perspective?
Yes, of course. I think the strategy that has worked the best for me, as I had mentioned previously, has been being openly gay, not hiding. And that has always allowed me to win respect. I have now very good friends that have told me, heterosexual friends that have said that I was the first gay person that they met. And I remember even many friends when I was an adolescent that they thought it was just a mode that would pass by soon. And Anise, you might remember, or Tammy, when having a gay friend was like a nice thing for middle classes. So yes, I do have a gay friend. No, now it's not an issue. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a group of LGBTQ members did work informally, for example, to start trying to see if the civil union could be accepted. And it was very important to have allies, high level authorities that were our friends, to make them sensitive to the need for fighting for our rights, or helping us fight for our rights. So, for example, we were even told that we should sue the ministry, so the Council Against Discrimination would give an opinion of how to go. But it was very important to have high-level authorities knowing that we were going to be doing this fight, and that it wasn't a personal thing, it wasn't against the institution, it was just precisely to try to gain rights. And lately, and there's new generations of LGBTQ members at the ministry. And for example, one important thing is now that we do have passports and health visas and health insurance for our partners. One thing that used to be complicated was that our condition would be taken into account the moment we were thought to be transferred to a different country. And for example, and we have been able to win that part. Like if you're sent, if you have a partner and you're sent to a country that where being LGBTQ is illegal, well, they're sending you, or they would be helping destroy either your partnership or your own life. So now that is well taken into account. I must say that in this, our foreign minister was the governor of Mexico City when gay marriage was passed. And so now he has proposed, and in this seminar, it has been spoken about this feminist foreign policy. But the important thing of this feminist foreign policy is that inclusion is part of equality. And so the last several years, for many of our embassies and consulates participate in, for example, in the Pride parades, and we all have been given instructions to make our spaces safe spaces. So there has been training in order to have all our people have the sensibilization of treatment to our communities. And in that sense, I totally agree with Anise that the trans are the sector that are more that have it a lot more complicated now, and that's where we still have to work a lot. In, for example, for our consular services, we have been getting training about it, but still, I think there's a lot more to do.
Thank you very much, Alberto, and thank you that you mentioned the aspect of being a second-class citizen, that we have all experienced when you go abroad, and also the risk that you have, and we will have more discussions later. But now we're going to hear from Tammy. Tammy, please.
Yeah, so as I was thinking about your question, a story comes to mind when I was in the workplace, and I had come out. I'd probably been out about 6 months, and a coworker came to me, and her daughter was actually struggling. She was coming out as a lesbian, and the family was just in turmoil. And I found myself moving from this position of coming out in the workplace to now being a resource for this coworker, and really helping to find resources for her and her family. And so, that's such an interesting role that we can play. I actually fought that at first because I thought, who am I? Who am I coming out? And I was just newly really working in the community. But then when I realized that I have a unique opportunity because we have this relationship and I can connect her to resources. And today it's really a wonderful story with their family about how they're connected. And it really makes me think about, in that case, this is a little twist, but me being an ally for her to help her, as Anise said, allies have a coming out process as well. And so for me, I've tried to embrace that role in helping, but recognizing I don't always have the answer. I thought Anise also just did a beautiful job of being an ally to the trans community and lifting up and saying, we have to take care of our trans brothers and sisters. And these are such visible ways that we can do that. And so, when I think about opportunities for our allies, our allies can help in terms of helping LGBTQ people to remove their armor. So I try to do this when I'm engaging with different people in the community, but as LGBTQ people often say, we get up in the morning like everybody else, right? And hopefully we shower, we all get dressed, but it's like putting this second layer of armor on. And I always say, and allies can really help us remove that armor. And, for me, I found some tremendous allies in the workplace, some that I quite frankly never even expected, and they made such a difference. But it's because they were intentional, and they were very specific about trying to use LGBTQ plus inclusive language. They were advocates for me. And so while sometimes we do need our allies to allow us to have the microphone, to have the seat at the table, they also can be can be a strong voice for us, particularly in environments where we're not being heard. And they can help, through their behavior, through their intentionality, bring awareness and understanding. And I do believe that's the key to being a strong ally. And it's a journey. It's step one. And step one is education, awareness and education, learning, understanding. What does it mean to be an ally? How can I best be an ally? Ask the community. And, I love again what Anise said, but, we kind of joke, but it's really so true. I'm a lesbian 12 months out of the year. That may come as a shock for some people. It's not just in June. And so I always encourage our allies, be an ally 12 months out of the year and use that voice to advocate, because July 1's going to come, and every day after that, and we need our allies in the workplace. Collaboration, I think, is so key to the work that we're doing in the community and engaging with the broader community. And I think that's it's just such a strong role that allies can play, both with family, in the workplace, and beyond.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you all of you for being aware of the privilege that some of us have, and that we are not a monolithic or a community, and that we understand and we share many similarities but also differences. And it is important to be aware of that our audience knows that we are aware of that. And Enrique, please, can you share with us your perspectives?
Sure, thank you. So on the strategy point, I would say one thing that has worked for me is be generous with your time and your resources as much as you're capable of. And by that, I mean, connect people to each other when you think they should meet, share that article with that person you think will find it useful, things like that. I think that's just, an excellent way to make yourself valuable as a colleague, and just more broadly as a member of your community and as a member of the movement. And two, and this has to do with something Anise mentioned at the beginning. It's just try constantly to look around and take note of whose voice is not represented, who is missing in a room, or at a table where decisions are being made. Speak up, try to change that at the moment or at a future opportunity. And on the advice point to people who want to be LGBT advocates or allies, first, to the allies, 100% agree with what Tammy said, is be an ally all year round. I think it's now, at least I would say generally in the cities where we live, for example, being an ally in June is super easy, it's trendy, it's cool, it's fun, and that's great. But I don't need you to speak up for me when I'm at a Pride March. I need you to speak up for me when I'm not listening to you, when I'm not in the room. Being an ally, I think, really takes having uncomfortable conversations with people who are close to you, because LGBT people have uncomfortable conversations with people we love all the time. So I think that's one. And advice to people who want to be LGBT advocates, if you can volunteer, take on internships, take any opportunities that you can. I'm aware that's not an option for everyone, and that's a discussion in nonprofit organizations all the time, because most of these are unpaid opportunities. I was privileged enough to do it for a little while, but if you can do it, or just find something you can do to get a start as early as possible. Write for a magazine or for a local newspaper, volunteer a few hours a week with a nonprofit. And also just try to grab as many information and knowledge that you can about the issues that you're interested in. You know, read, watch, listen to as many podcasts and radio shows and books and magazines that you can. Read as many reports that different organizations put out. Follow people with credentials in the field, attend their events, talk to them, talk to that people, ask them how or why they started working on the field. Most of them, in my experience, and I can say most of us, as I am now one of them, too, are generous with their time and with their resources. If you approach them and you ask them, you know, can you recommend an organization for me to approach? Can you suggest I read something specific? I'd love to pick your brain for a few minutes. Can we grab, you know, coffee or get on a conference call for a few minutes? Do that. I know the word networking is kind of overused at this point, but I think it is so important. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Enrique, and thank you all for these great insights. And we have a couple of questions from the audience. We're going to try to move on to the Q&A session. And I have one question that actually is pertinent to our panelists, because we are a transnational panel. And it's specific about Houston and Mexico City, but I will make it Houston or the United States and Mexico City or the whole country of Mexico. This region has advanced a lot in LGBTQ rights, but even today, we are experiencing some violence against members of the community, as it was mentioned before, particularly our trans folks. How can we fight violence nowadays in the 21st century, when we are moving towards sort of like some kind of liberation, quote unquote, but we are still experiencing violence and there are people dying because they express their gender expression or identity or the sexual orientation are different than the heteronormative or heterosexual patriarchal impositions in our society. So here I invite the panelists who would like to go first. You can unmute yourself and speak up.
I think.
Thank you, Alberto.
That what is very important is to not take for granted what we have advanced, especially in North America. I was reading yesterday a note of what is happening in Hungary, for example, where the legislature has passed laws precisely against anything related to LGBTQ. So not taking for granted means to continue advocating, to continue fighting for our rights to be respected. And it's not only violence, it doesn't happen only to the LGBTQ, it also happens to minorities, as we saw 2 years ago unfortunately in El Paso, with this horror crime against Mexicans, or it happened in Orlando at the gay bar also several years ago. So I don't think there's a specific way, but just to continue fighting and trying to have our voice heard as loud as possible, with respect to the otherness too.
Thank
but
you.
it's happening to Asians right now across America. And we have to recognize that we each have to stand up for each other. It's not just about advocating for the LGBTQ community, but for those who are assaulted because of their race or their ethnicity or their religion, their national origin. We have to all be allies to each other. And as Tammy said earlier, we have to do it all the time. We have to be willing to stand up. This is about human beings will resort to our baser natures if we're not constantly vigilant. One of the quotes that we hear a lot is from Reverend Martin Luther King, and it's about the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I don't really like that quote because people use it as if you just wish things would happen, it would happen. No, the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice because people have put their hand on the arc and moved it into place. People have thrown their bodies into the fire and made change, and generation after generation stepping up and moving toward a better future. It requires constant vigilance. The other thing I will say is that the reason I do the work I do now, that I've gone from business to politics to leading an LGBT organization, is that an LGBT political organization, is that it doesn't matter how many marches you do or how many protests you do, someone has to be in the room making law, codifying it, putting it into place, and then someone has to be in a position to enforce the law. So we need to make sure that our governments look like our communities, that everyone is represented, and then there are people in positions of power who are willing to use that power to advocate for good. So I am absolutely committed to being a part of changing the political process.
Thank you. I think it's very important to think about these intersectionalities, particularly because our societies are very diverse and unique, and the othering of people, those who are not like me, is a common practice among our societies, and I mean, we need to fight against those prejudices. Anyone else before we move to the next question? Tammy?
No, I was just going to say, I think there very much has to be, in addressing violence, intentionality with law enforcement. We see, with the new police chief, Chief Finner, he's very committed for LGBTQ inclusion. The department has been historically, certainly under Mayor Parker's administration. And but that is so key to combat violence, both educating down through the police force, through law enforcement at all levels, but also with that community engagement. And I think that is incredibly key when you're thinking about combating violence, to try to be, it's very much both preventative, but when things happen, how is law enforcement responding post-trauma, post-violence, and making sure that communities that there's continual engagement and that communities feel safe. And I think that's extremely, extremely important, especially in the environment we're living in today.
Exactly. Thank you. Especially when some members of our community, as Ms. Parker and I mean, as you and Alberto and Enrique has said, have experienced violence because they are trans or non-binary, and sometimes they don't have the luxury to respond. to respond because they are just being abused immediately by members of the police. And Enrique, do you have any insights before we move on to the next question?
Just quickly, I just wanted to go off from something Anise said. And, a few days ago, we had an election in Mexico, and it was the first time that so many openly LGBT candidates were running for office, including people who have, as some of us here have, gone from the private sector to LGBT organizations, now into politics, back into organizations, back and forth. And I think something that we really need, and I think we're just starting to understand it and value it here in Mexico, and that's something that the LGBT Institute has understood and promoted for many years, is the importance of having people from the community running for those positions. And I think it's, for most people in our community or in our movement, it's something that is not attractive or appealing at all. I'm one of them, but I support the people who decide to do it. And I think it's really important that we do that, because that's, as Annie said, I mean, at the end of the day, you need someone, either a great champion or a great ally, or someone from within the community itself there, making, lifting up our voices and having a perspective that you only have, speaking about LGBT, but this applies to any community, and a perspective that you only have from experience, from lived experience.
Thank you. Excellent, Enrique. I think it is important to be able to, from the members of our community, to ask for respect from the politicians, that we want acts. We just don't want you to come to the community when there is an election. There is a question that I'll read to you. It says, do you believe that there are similarities between the fight for rights among LGBTQ plus communities and women? Thinking about the hashtag #MeToo movement or some other recent demonstrations that they have had. I mean, they have been all over the world, and the United States and Mexico are not the exception. So any similarities between between the two movements?
Absolutely. Women are discriminated against. Those in the LGBTQ community are discriminated against. We are often taken for granted, viewed as somehow less than, not granted our full rights and access. Women who are part of the LGBTQ community, the trans women or lesbians, bisexual women, are often exploited in the workplace and face often double discrimination. So, and I have found over the years a lot of support in the women's community for the work I have done as an LGBT activist, and a lot of support within the LGBTQ community for issues concerning women.
Thank you, Anis. Anybody else? Tammy?
Yeah, I would just say, certainly there are parallels. And when you think about so many women, particularly single mothers, our community, the LGBTQ community, we live in poverty. 1 out of 5 people live in poverty in the community. And, when you think about health disparities, all these other pieces, it's all parallel, right? Women are behind when it comes to, for every dollar a man makes, and and I forget what the latest number is. But from an economic standpoint, our community is behind, women are woefully behind. And this is why, as Anise mentioned, it's so important that we elect officials. We need more women in office. We need more LGBTQ representation in office to address all of these issues, to make sure that we're seen and we're heard and we have a voice. And it's our allies are great, and that's what has gotten us to this point. But these systemic issues, they must be addressed for both the LGBTQ community and for women. And so having the right people in leadership are absolutely key if we're going to address, for us at the Chamber, it's about economic inclusion and addressing economic inequality. So you bet there are definite parallels on so many levels. And this is what happens for disenfranchised and marginalized communities. And it's why we have so much work to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At the University of Houston, at the center, the Institute for Research on Women's Gender and Sexuality, we did a research about the salaries that women, the difference between men and women, but also Hispanic women, African-American women, Asian women in the city of Houston, also the country. So I invite you, our audience, to go to our website, the Institute for Research on Women, Gender and Sexuality, to see our report, because sadly we are not there yet. We are still with some problems. And there is a question for, I would say for Alberto, because it says, and also I think, Alberto, you already touched on this question, answered this question, but it says, how do the consulate and embassies from Mexico move towards inclusiveness and helping the LGBTQ, fighting against violence with the LGBTQ people. Can you talk about a little bit what the Ministry of Foreign Service is doing?
Yes, thank you for the question. Just also mentioning there is a parallel as between the women's movement and the LGBTQ. I also agree. I tell my women colleagues when they have their all women meetings that they should invite some of LGBTQ people and have inclusion, and as we can see with this panel precisely, Consul General Kerber does have very clear that inclusion is part of the Me Too, the women's fight. In particular, at the consulates and at the embassies, consular sections, is something that is that we now are allowed to do that we were not allowed to do a couple of years ago, is perform same-sex marriage abroad. That was the first thing. There had to be a sue in New York. Someone sued the consulate, and finally we were allowed. It's still a case by case. We're still not where we should be, but now we can do that. Registration of children of LGBTQ parents is also a new thing. Before you could register them, but there always had to be a he and a she. And now, again, it's still a one-on-one. We have to have a special permit, but we are able now to do that. We have, all the consulates have a booth for the integral work with women, and that was precisely created by Consul General Kerber since when she was in Kansas, and now she was able to sell it to all the consular network in the US and Canada. And so through that booth, we can provide especially trans persons legal advice and assistance in order to change their identity. So I would say that those are the three services that I would think about right now. But also, as I mentioned previously, what has been very important has been training our staff in all the consular network in order to have the sensibility of how to treat people, LGBTQ people, and particularly trans people when they come to the consulates.
Thank you very much. We have, time, we have only 4 or 5 minutes max. There is one question that I would like to address, the last question. And maybe a couple of you would like to talk about this. It says, do you think we should continue working to become visible to our society as LGBTQ plus members, or focus our efforts to becoming a part of our communities without the LGBTQ label? Could this be a way to ease discrimination and hate against our community worldwide?
Well, I see with my nephews, and being gay, I have several, and being gay is not an issue anymore. Like going, I met my husband in a gay bar, because that's where we would meet people then, before internet. And now that's not an issue. You can do it by internet. But I do think that we should continue being visible. It is important, and not only in June. Gay pride festivals are not what they used to be. They have become very commercial. But I do think that there doesn't have to be a gay neighborhood in every city. There can be many gay-friendly neighborhoods, but it is important to as a community, to continue working to be heard as a community.
Thank you. Anybody else? Enrique, would you like to talk
Yeah,
about that?
I mean, just similar to Alberto, I also see with my, with younger people I get to talk to, with my cousins, how labels they're not getting rid of labels at all. They're just being more and more comfortable with labels and not attaching, a value of, who's worth more, or who's more important, or who deserves what, depending on how you identify or where you come from, and these things. I think we're very, very, I mean, to me, when people say, like, we should live in a society without any labels attached to gender or sexual orientation, it sounds like another planet. It sounds like so foreign to me. And I don't think that's what the goal necessarily is. I think what we want is, being visible, being out, being ourselves, without that meaning that we have to give up any aspect of our life or our security or our freedom.
Thank
Well
you.
said.
Anis? Okay.
Well said. They did a good job.
Okay. So I think with this, we will end our discussion. And indeed, thank you to the Consul General of Mexico for inviting us to organize this panel in this amazing conference. But thank you, fellow panelists, for helping us to to teach us more about this and sharing with us your insights, your experience. I mean, for those young people there who are either members of the community or not, the many members of this panel have been fighting so hard for our rights, the rights of justice, the rights to equity and equality and inclusion, which is something that we all deserve. So thank you very much. Thank you, Consul Kerber, for the invitation, and thank you, panelists, and thank you, the audience, for your great questions, and also for staying with us. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guillermo, and thank you to all our panelists. The work that you have done to break barriers and advance the human rights agenda has been fundamental. The commitment of the foreign minister to transverse the gender approach give us the opportunity to promote public policies and to make agreements with several local organizations. That's the commitment of the consular network. So I think that we must continue breaking barriers to benefit of the new generation so that they can live in a more inclusive and more equitable world. And let's continue fighting against hate. So thank you very much. And I will now agradeceremos la presencia de todos, todas y todes ustedes en esta mesa, y los invitamos a que a las 11:30 se conecten con nosotros en la mesa La riqueza cultural de las mujeres indígenas rompiendo estereotipos. Muchas gracias a todos y buenas tardes.
Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.
Gracias.
Chao.
Thank you so much.